Okay, we are back and we are today taking a look at Storm as an archetype in Modern Horizons 3. So this is going to cover both sort of traditional Storm with cost reducers and then Desperate Ritual, Pyretic Ritual, Metamorphose, or what would loosely fall under the umbrella of Gifts Storm, although the archetype has been around longer than it has played Gifts. And then we're also going to take a little bit of a look at some other storm related things, Twiddle Storm or storm decks involving Lotus Field. So that's the plan for today. Tomorrow, probably, or whenever I next get to it, I'll take a look at some of the new or potentially interesting, more brew like combo decks that could pop up as a result of MH3. So the first thing that we need to talk about is Ruby Medallion. Ruby Medallion has existed for a pretty long time. It's been in Legacy. It enables the Ruby Storm archetype in Legacy, but it is new to Modern with this printing in MH3. And all of the medallions are printed. It's just that Ruby Medallion is the most interesting for combo players because the rituals in Modern are red, in particular Desperate Ritual and Pyretic Ritual. So Ruby Medallion does sort of require making some fundamental changes to the storm decks that are getting played. It only discounts red spells, so you can't really be playing many or any, if you can help it, blue spells or any other color, really. You want to be as close to mono red as you possibly can. The payoff for this is that you have a reducer that is not vulnerable to creature removal. So anyone who has played a bunch of traditional Gift Storm knows how annoying it is to have to deal with your reducers getting removed. And I think that susceptibility to creature removal is one of the biggest weaknesses of current modern Storm decks. Now, various fixes to that have been tried. Case of the Ransacked Lab just came out. If you take a look at some of my videos from a month or two back, I was trying out some builds involving like Case and the One Ring and playing a more slower controlling game plan. I think that's a reasonable attempt, but Ruby Medallion does give us a way to try to operate a little bit more quickly while also dodging that creature removal. So, this is the card I am most excited for Storm decks in Modern, but, there are a whole bunch of other ones to take a look at, and one of those is Ral Monsoon Mage. So Ral is interesting in that, I was just talking about how the weakness was creature vulnerability, right? So what does Ral open up? Well, Ral is sort of your traditional bear. Instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, but it has a couple of interesting things going for it. One is that it is red. So anyone who has played Baral knows how annoying it can sometimes be to be in a spot where you maybe want to go Ritual Baral and then Ritual afterwards, but you need like a Metamorphose to facilitate that. It's just not that likely to work. Ral, however, can be played you can Ritual, Ral, Ritual, and try to keep going for it there. That opens potentially lines off of 2 mana, which is, in my opinion, very interesting. The other interesting thing about Ral, well, actually, there's a couple. One is that it is discounted by Ruby Medallion. Ruby Medallion does not just discount instants and sorceries, it also discounts reds. It just discounts red spells in general. So Ral, being a red spell, can be played mid-combo for 1 red off of Ruby Medallion. And in addition to being a reducer or an enabler for your combo, Ral can to some extent function as a combo piece. So Ral, if you transform him, you can use his plus loyalty ability to have him continue to act as a reducer if that's what you need. His -2 is going to be something you're not going to use very much, although maybe there's a fringe time where you flip him and you just need that extra little bit of damage to get there with an exact grape shot line. It's possible. But his +8 or his -8 can potentially win you the game on the spot. So it says exile the top 8 cards of your library. You may cast instant or sorcery spells from among them without paying their mana costs. So Ral gets an additional loyalty counter for each instant or sorcery spell you've cast before him this turn. So if you've cast 6 spells before you flip to the Planeswalker side, then you're going to come in and immediately be able to use this ultimate. So that is very powerful. It's a way to find some business. Now, that being said, Ral's mechanic for flipping is a little bit weird, and sometimes this can be a downside, and sometimes this can be an upside. So every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you're going to flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Ral deals a damage to you. If you win the flip, you may exile Ral, and if you do, return him transformed under your control. So that means that if your opponent goes to remove Ral, you can potentially dodge removal by playing another instant or sorcery spell. So while he's not fully immune to removal, you could say he is perhaps probabilistically immune to removal. Because if you manage to cast, say, 2 instant or sorcery spells in response to removal, there's a 75% chance your Ral is going to flip. If you manage to cast 3, then it'll be, 87.5 that your Ral is going to flip, and so on. So your likelihood increases for each additional instance or sorcery you cast. Now, if you have an unlucky run and you are trying to combo from very low life, it is possible that Ral kills you with this 1 damage. In addition, there are times you may not want to flip Ral in order to build up enough Storm before you flip him so that you can immediately use his -8. That being said, you can potentially flip into a Planeswalker Ral, use the plus, and then play a second Ral mid-combo, and then work on getting that one to the -8 or something like that. You could also, it only hits instant or sorceries. But yeah, so that's Ral. He potentially dodges removal, which is cool. He's definitely a lot better than Baral, much less Electromancer. And he's both a combo card, as far like a combo piece or an engine piece, in addition to being your reducer and enabler, which is nice. Now, so I think those two are the most likely strong contenders from the set. Now, we have a bunch of other potentially interesting things for Storm, and one of those is the energy package. So when I say the energy package, I'm referring to Wheel of Potential. Really, I think, is the reason to try to play energy. If you have 6, 7, 8 energy, you can potentially have something that is literally just Wheel of Fortune. In fact, you could say it's better than Wheel of Fortune because you exile your hand and then draw that many cards, and you can still play the cards that are exiled in your hand. So if you can get to 7 energy, you have better than Wheel of Fortune. Now, how can we potentially try to get to 7 energy? Well, Tune the Narrative is just a cheap 1 blue, draw a card, get 2 energy. Unstable Amulet, so note that this is red, so it would be reduced by Ruby Medallion. This generates 2 energy. It also functions as a win con, so whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, Unstable Amulet deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if you're casting a bunch of spells out of your graveyard with a Past in Flames, if you're casting spells from exile, either with Tune the Narrative or something like Ren's Resolve or whatever, maybe a Galvanic Relay, then Unstable Amulet is turning each of those into 1 damage. And if you have multiple amulets, this can quickly stack up. And finally, in Desperation, you can pay 2 energy to exile the top card and play it until you exile another card. So Amulet is sort of a grape shot that also is going to give you a couple energy if you play it in advance. And then we've got Amped Raptor. Again, this can be reduced by Ruby Medallion, so this could cost just 1 red. You get 2 energy, and then you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land. You may cast that by paying an amount of energy equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So that's what I'm going to call loosely here the energy package. So if you're using Tune the Narrative, Amped Raptor, Unstable Amulet to get you some extra energy in addition, and then you cash that in for big Wheel of Potentials, you can potentially wheel and draw through your deck. Some other potentially interesting cards. There's Glimpse the Impossible, which is an exile the top 3. You can play them, and if you don't play them, they turn into Eldrazi spawns. I think this card is maybe worth thinking about in that it is a exile the top 3, like an impulse draw for 3 cards. I mean, this effect does already exist with Act on Impulse. This is a slightly better version of it, I think, but it's not exactly I think this is not exactly amazing, but something to think about. Brain Surge as well. I mean, draw 4 cards, put 2 cards back. This is not as close to Brainstorm as I think it probably needs to be, and it's in a little bit of an awkward spot because if the main reducer is Ruby Medallion, Brain Surge is blue. Now, if Brain Surge costed 2, it would be very, very, very strong, but costing 3, I think it's not that much better than something like Thirst for Knowledge or any of those like 2 and a blue, draw 3, discard 1 in some capacity cards. It's a little better, but it's not that much better, I think. I could be wrong, but I don't think this is going to see very much play. We've got the normal sort of flex cards in the land base. So, Rush of Inspiration. I think this card is not necessarily that good, but it is potentially in a land slot. You can also play the 1 blue return a permanent or spell, or whatever your choice of dual face cards are. So definitely, when you see a land base in the deck list that I'm going to take a look at in a second, feel free to sort of mentally adjust for, maybe we can fit in a couple dual face cards or 2 to tune it a little bit better. Deserted Temple. So this is more for a Lotus Field style of deck. So if you have a Lotus Field in play, Deserted Temple can untap that Lotus Field, and Deserted Temple essentially is acting like a 2-mana land in that case. Now, Pioneer, for example, would love Deserted Temple. Modern Lotus Field doesn't necessarily require a second land in play, so it may seem like this is a little bit without a home. I do have an interesting idea for this in the Decklist section, but if nothing with Lotus Field pans out, this will probably end up maybe being like a Coffers type of card, perhaps. Planar Genesis. Again, something that Pioneer Lotus Field would really like to have. Look at it's just better impulse, where if you hit a land, you can put it into play tapped rather than just taking it into your hand. It's sort of impulse meets growth spiral in that way, I guess you could say. But Modern, again, I think this doesn't have that much of a home. Modern Lotus Field is not necessarily playing impulse. It's a little bit slow to be playing like a 2-mana cantrip in Modern. That being said, this is a pretty powerful effect, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of world where this could see play. I think with only 4 Lotus Field, it's a little bit dicey, so you need to be playing a deck that has more hits. It's possible that this goes in a deck that is playing bounce lands. I know there's the bounce land amulet storm decks that have been seeing a little bit of play. I know the Epic Storm was messing around with them, so definitely maybe go check out their videos if you're interested in something like that. So maybe this could have a home somewhere like that. Either way, it's an interesting card and something I definitely want to keep an eye on in the future. Consigned to Memory. Counter target triggered ability or colorless spell. This is potentially something for Lotus Field, but again, modern Lotus Field doesn't care that much about sacking the lands. I mean, it's nice to not have to sack the lands, but just this could also work as a potential sideboard card. So this is an interesting card overall, but I think not necessarily going to be one of the big players, at least for Storm. I think this could see more play in other archetypes, perhaps. And then Meltdown, a legacy classic that is making its way to Modern. This would be a pretty good sideboard card against artifacts, so definitely something we're interested in depending on how the artifact situation shapes up. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some deck lists out of these cards that may be interesting when the set comes out. So the first list I have here is what I'm calling Ruby Energy. So the entire collection of energy cards that we just talked about are represented over here. So Reach Through the Mists is representing the Tune the Narrative. The Wheel of Fortune is obviously representing Wheel of Potential. The Amped Raptor is represented by Frenzied Raptor, and the Grape Shot is representing Unstable Amulet. Finally, Baral, Chief of Compliance, is representing Ral. So we're playing a pretty heavy energy package here, and the idea is that we're just looking to build up energy and then wheel into wheel into wheel into wheel using our Ruby medallions. Now, I think this list is maybe the one I'm least excited about as far as the sort of traditional blue-red Storm decks. I think that the energy package is likely to be a little bit clunky, and I don't think it's going to really play that well in practice, but I am including it here just for the sake of completeness and because it does feel like it would be pretty cool to chain a bunch of wheels together. Now, I think there is also potentially a non-energy version of a wheel-based Storm deck. Can definitely think about playing things like Wheel of Fate alongside Electro Dominance or maybe Bloodbraid Marauder. You could also potentially run Gaia's Will in that sort of situation. And I mean, you wouldn't be able to run Preordain, but Ruby Medallion does like reduce Bloodbraid Marauder and do interesting things like that. I couldn't really find a list that I felt would likely be able to achieve Delirium consistently enough. You can get land pretty easily. I guess maybe you can get instant reasonably easily, sorcery, but then what's your fourth card type? Maybe you can make like enchantment happen if you're playing that 1 in a red, draw 2, discard 1, sack to give creatures haste. That why can I not think of the name of that card? So maybe that, or maybe you can get the maybe you can get like an artifact in play, but you really don't want to be playing Bauble. So I didn't necessarily see something that I felt could achieve Delirium consistently enough. So I don't have that built at the moment, but something to think about. So what am I more interested in as far as Storm decks? Well, okay, so our next version here is the Creatureless Storm deck. And this deck is not playing Ral, it's looking to not expose any creatures, and instead it's playing Case of the Ransacked Lab. So Case of the Ransacked Lab and Ruby Medallion mean that all of our reducers are not vulnerable to creature removal. Now, Case plays very nicely with Galvanic Relay, because with Case, potentially you are incentivized into spending a bunch of your spells in the same turn in order to solve the case, because then Case can act like an engine. And Galvanic Relay is also a card where you are incentivized into spending several of your spells in the same turn. So you can definitely do something like Case, Ruby, or you can definitely do something like Ritual. On turn 3, for example, you can like Ritual, Case, Ritual, play, like a Metamorphose and a Ren's Resolve, and then play a Relay, and then you will have solved your case, and then you'll also have a Relay for like 5 or 6 or something sitting there, and then you'll also have the cards sitting on the side with Ren's Resolve. So you'll have a nice big hand to try to combo on the next turn. And even if your opponent removes the case, then maybe you can still combo just with the hand that you have sitting there. So Relay, potentially very interesting in that sense alongside Case. Now, Ruby also opens up potentially like Ritual, Ruby, Ritual lines on turn 2, so you can do something like that. The couple of Strike It Riches here, while they don't play that nicely with Ruby, they do potentially enable turn 2 Ruby Ritual, or they enable turn 2 Case, or they enable turn 3 Case ritual, and then go from there. So there's a bunch of different things that they do enable. They also can filter some red to blue to play these preordains, and mainly we're splashing for preordain in all of these different storm builds. So this would be a list that doesn't play the creatures, sort of tries to maximize Case and Galvanic Relay to play like a mini spell turn and then really go for it the next turn with a much stronger engine. One thing I do want to note is a lot of these different lists are interested in Defense Grid as a sideboard card. Ruby can kind of play this in the middle of the combo. This is a legacy sort of style card. A lot of these lists can't really be playing Remand in the same way as was like a traditional piece of interaction for Storm. So I think Grid gets a lot better as a means of fighting against some counter magic. So that is the creatureless Ruby list. And then finally we have the Ral Ruby list. So in this case, Baral is representing Ral. And we've gone away from the slower plan with Relay and Case, and instead we're just trying to be as quick as possible, and we're trying to leverage Ral's probabilistic immunity to removal in order to just go for some sort of fast, like turn 2 ritual, Ruby or Ral, ritual, and then do something with Past in Flames maybe, or like some Reckless Impulses and Ren's Resolves that hit something. Wish is here as our tutor, and we can play a Wish board. We can get a Past in Flames and empty the Warrens. A Galvanic Relay if things go wrong. One other thing I want to note, if we're playing Ral into potentially a removal heavy deck, then I want to be bringing in free spells. This could be Gut Shot, this could be Noxious Survival. Gut Shot is just sort of representing generic free spells here. I'm interested in, again, playing free spells that can flip Ral in response to removal. The other thing you can do is just play around this by waiting a turn, and then if you have 2 mana left over following, playing your Ral, then your first Desperate Ritual or whatever baits the removal, and then you respond to it with another ritual, and maybe you go like Ritual Metamorphose, and then you have a 75% chance of dodging the removal. The Spikefield Hazards also help with that because they are a cheap spell that you can play. Okay, so that is the Ral version. Bergie is mostly here as the Harnfell side, but it could also be played as a creature if you needed to. Again, a lot of these lists are pretty rough drafts. Definitely feel free to suggest any sort of changes or anything that you're interested in seeing different, or what you like or what you don't like. Definitely also note that we can potentially be looking at versions of these that swap in some of the dual face cards. One thing to note here is that I'm leaning fully onto the red cards, and I'm only really playing Preordain off of dual lands. So we're going red fetch lands and then mountains as our land, with the presence of the blue Harbinger of the Seas, is it? Whichever one turns everything into islands. We do actually sort of need to be mindful of getting all of our lands turned into islands potentially. So I like having a basic mountain in a spot where Storm wouldn't really have had basic mountains traditionally. And because the blue splash is so light, again, this is not Brawl, this is just Ral. It's literally just splashing for Preordain. That's something we can do off of fetches or off of a couple dual lands and Metamorphose. A lot of these lists are not necessarily going to have a play on turn 1, really only having Preordain. So I do like the 1 Surveil land as a good target for a turn 1 fetch. Okay, so then we've got something a little bit weird and a little bit different for the last list I want to take a look at, and that's what I'm calling Amulet Lotus. So I've worked with lists like this in the past a little bit, and I never really ended up recording a league or posting one, because the issue I always had was it felt like unless you had multiple amulets in play, you weren't doing anything. You can just kind of spin your wheels, but you're not gaining an advantage. So what is this list looking to do? Well, it's looking to get a Lotus Field alongside Amulet into play, and then it's looking to sacrifice the Lotus Field after to its own trigger after untapping and making some mana. This leads to lines like turn 1 Urza Saga, turn 2 play like some other land, and then turn 3 sack your Saga, go get Amulet, play a Lotus Field. You only have 2 lands, but you just untap and float some mana before sacking your Lotus Field. That means that Faith's Reward and Splendid Reclamation can act as your rituals. Beseech the Mirror can potentially go get a Faith's Reward, or less ideally Splendid Reclamation, because you're probably sacking your Amulet to Beseech the Mirror. And then that brings back your Amulet as well as your lands, and overall it makes these act like rituals. So you have rituals, you have Past in Flames, Beseech can go get that, and then loop your rituals. You also have Twiddle and Dream's Grip for a little bit of extra mana, and then once you loop your rituals, what you're eventually looking to do is find either via Preordain or some extra tutoring a Bitter Reunion, and then you can Bitter Reunion, empty the Warrens for a big wide swing. This deck is not necessarily going to get all the way up to 20 Storm, so I don't think Grape Shot is quite as good. Now, this list I'm considering due to Deserted Temple. So what does Deserted Temple do? Well, Deserted Temple sort of acts like Amulet of Vigor. Before you're like, wait, what is he talking about? Hear me out here. So Deserted Temple represents +2 mana if you have a Lotus Field into play. So if you're sacking Deserted Temple and Lotus Field to a Lotus Field trigger, you will have made 5 mana. So 3 from untapping the Lotus Field, and then you spend 1 of it to Deserted Temple the Lotus Field, and then you get to use the Lotus Field again, so you make 5 mana off of this Deserted Temple Lotus Field combo. That means that your Faith's Rewards and your Splendid Reclamations are mana positive. This was a huge issue I had when I was trying to brew with this deck in the past. If you only had like 1 Amulet in play, then Lotus Field plus another land was mana neutral, so you really needed multiple Amulets in play. I'm hoping that with Deserted Temple and, that turning these into mana positive things, then this could be a deck that, maybe could be pretty speedy. This deck can win on turn 3. It can conceivably even win on turn 2 with something like, let's say you play, just in the ideal world, turn 1 Temple Amulet, turn 2 second Amulet, Lotus Field, go nuts. So this deck can have some very explosive wins, and the little bit I played of it, when you had multiple Amulets in play, it really did feel like a Legacy Storm deck. Zern Orb is here to sack some of your other lands so that you can sort of capitalize fully on the Faith's Reward and Splendid Rec. Expedition Map is how we find Lotus Field, so there are far too many colorless lands for me to really be comfortable with Sylvan Scrying here, especially with Deserted Temple included. So Expedition Map is going to have to be how we find field, and really what we're looking to do is play like a Saga on 1, so Saga and Amulet are different ways of finding Amulet. So that's the idea. This is definitely something I will be testing as well in the future. We'll see if I feel like it's strong enough to warrant, further experimentation with. All right, so those are some of the lists that I've got, and I think Storm has a lot of interesting toys to play with in Modern Horizons 3. Now, traditional Lotus Field style Storm, I think, did not get that many new toys, unfortunately. I mean, maybe a couple sideboard cards, Meltdown could be nice, maybe the Stifle could be nice, but I think sort of the traditional blue-red Ritual Storm is the big winner as far as Storm decks go. So we'll see what can come from all of that. Looking forward to testing it out with you guys, and tune in once MH3 is released to see the different possibilities. All right, bye everyone.